Hello and welcome again to Bible Talk with Bruce and Becky. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood here in Chattanooga. Unseasonably warm, barely a cloud in the sky, but that's about to change tonight as cold fronts move in from Canada. Shame on them. Well, we have had a longer interval between episodes than usual. Life intervened again, mostly Becky's theatrical performances, which are now behind us, and she'll resume real life if there is such a thing. Let's get into Genesis chapter 43.
Right.
Joseph's brothers have been to Egypt once and got grain from Joseph without realizing who he was. He has demanded that they bring Benjamin down when they return, but Jacob is not willing to do that. So we'll pick up there in chapter 43. Becky, will you read, please, through verse 14?
Now the famine was still severe in the land. So when they had eaten all the grain they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, "Go back and buy us a little more food." But Judah said to him, "The man warned us solemnly, 'You will not see my face again unless your brother is with you.' If you will send your brother along with us, we will go down and buy food for you. But if you will not send him, we will not go down. Because the man said to us, 'You will not see my face again unless your brother is with you.'" Israel asked, "Why did you bring this trouble on me by telling the man you had another brother?" They replied, "The man questioned us closely about ourselves and our family. 'Is your father still living?' he asked us. 'Do you have another brother?' We simply answered his questions. How were we to know he would say, 'Bring your brother down here'?" Then Judah said to Israel his father, "Send the boy along with me, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die. I myself will guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him here before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life. As it is, if we had not delayed, we could have gone and returned twice." Then their father Israel said to them, "If it must be, then do this. Put some of the best products of the land in your bags and take them down to the man as a gift. A little balm and a little honey, some spices and myrrh, some pistachio nuts and almonds. Take double the amount of silver with you, for you must return the silver that was put back into the mouths of your sacks. Perhaps it was a mistake. Take your brother also and go back to the man at once. And may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he will let your other brother and Benjamin come back with you. As for me, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved."
Well, Jacob, of course, is unwilling to let Benjamin go. What is so special about Benjamin that Joseph insists he wants to see him and that Jacob will not let him go at this point? Remind us, Becky.
Joseph and Benjamin had the same mama.
That's right, they're the two sons of Rachel. The others are sons of Leah, or the two handmaidens, two servants, women. And Jacob believes he's lost Joseph forever and he doesn't want to lose Benjamin. But he's between a rock and a pile of grain. They need food and they're going to starve without it, so he sends them back with a gift for Joseph, of course, not knowing it's Joseph at this point. So, verse 15, the men took this present and they took double the money with them and Benjamin. They arose and went down to Egypt and stood before Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, "Bring the men into the house and slaughter an animal and make ready, for the men are to dine with me at noon." The man did as Joseph told him and brought the men to Joseph's house. The men were afraid because they were brought to Joseph's house, and they said, "It's because of the money which we replaced in our sacks the first time that we are brought in so that he may assault us and fall upon us, to make us servants and seize our donkeys. So they went up to the steward of Joseph's house and spoke with him at the door of the house, and said, O my lord, we came down the first time to buy food, and when we came to the lodging place we opened our sacks, and there was each man's money in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight. So we brought it again with us, and we have brought other money down with us to buy food. We do not know who put our money in our sacks. Peace to you, he said. Do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has put treasure in your sacks for you. I received your money. Then he brought Simeon out to them. When the man had brought them into Joseph's house and given them water, and they'd washed their feet, and when he had given their donkeys fodder, they prepared the present for Joseph's coming at noon, for they heard that they should eat bread there. Little touches in the Bible narratives give it a very realistic picture of how people actually behave. For example, these brothers who've always been arguing about something argue about whether they should go back or not. And in verse 10, Judah, after offering himself as a ransom, said, well, we could have gone twice if we hadn't been delaying here, Daddy.
That sounded like a kid, a grown kid.
That's right. Sounded like a brother who can't let anything pass without bringing it up. And here, the men are afraid because they don't know how their money got back in their sacks. Did you notice, Becky, in verse 23, that he referred to your God and the God of your father has put the money back in your sacks?
Yeah.
He, I think, must have gotten that kind of information from Joseph, referring to the God of the Israelites, who was also the God of his father and his grandfather and his great-grandfather. Well, Joseph has got them set up for another test. Anything, Becky, you want to bring up or ask about before we plunge ahead?
Um, where do you think the money? I know the money came from Joseph. Joseph told him to put it back in the sacks.
All right.
So I guess he also told him that you're supposed to tell him it came from God.
That would be a very probable explanation, especially for his steward who is over the household. The steward has a position similar to what Joseph had in Potiphar's house and in the jail. So he's told them what to do should the men come back. Well, Becky, please read beginning at verse 26 through the end of the chapter at verse 34.
When Joseph came home, they presented to him the gifts they had brought into the house, and they bowed down before him to the ground. He asked them how they were, and then he said, How is your aged father you told me about? Is he still living? They replied, Your servant our father is still alive and well, and they bowed down, prostrating themselves before him. As he looked about and saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son, he asked, Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about? And he said, God be gracious to you, my son. Deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. He went into his private room and wept there. After he had washed his face, he came out and, controlling himself, said, Serve the food. They served him by himself, and the brothers by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because Egyptians could not eat with Hebrews, for that is detestable to Egyptians. The men had been seated before him in the order of their ages, from the firstborn to the youngest, and they looked at each other in astonishment. When portions were served to them from Joseph's table, Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as anyone else's, so they feasted and drank freely with him.
Okay. Joseph continues to confound them with his knowledge. They may think it's because he has the gift of divination, which he referred to earlier when they took his silver goblet, with which he divined the things that he needed to know. He seats them in order of their ages without asking who's the oldest and who's the youngest. And we learn, kind of ironically, that the Egyptians don't want to eat with the Hebrews. Later on, when the dietary restrictions of the law are enforced, it might have been the other way around. But Joseph, being high up in the hierarchy of Egypt, sits at a table by himself, neither with the other Egyptians or his brothers. Well, Benjamin's portion is 5 times as much as any of theirs. I'm sure Benjamin couldn't have eaten that much, but Joseph is obviously showing favoritism to the brother from his own mother. The rest of them are brothers from another mother, as they say nowadays at times. Well, what else would you want to add to this, Becky?
It's a very human story, a human supernatural story.
And I would say the narrator is very good at building suspense.
Yeah, he's left us hanging here at the end of the chapter.
Well, we have time to move on to the next chapter. Praise be. So maybe we'll get ourselves off the cliff without falling.
Of course, the author didn't divide it into chapters.
No, he didn't, but the episodes divide pretty well in this part of the story, from chapter to chapter. Who divided it into chapters?
Some preacher on a horseback, I think.
That's kind of the story. It actually was a monk many centuries after this, who apparently was on a trip to Paris riding in a carriage and used his time to divide the Bible into chapters and verses. Although the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, had been divided into sections by the scribe that copied it, but not like we have it now. And knowing how human beings are, the main impetus for dividing it into chapters and verses was so that in debates and arguments you could refer to a passage more readily. Sounds like a lot of Bible readers that I've known over the years. Well, enough of that. Let's go on to chapter 44. We're moving rapidly now, and eventually we'll finish all 50 chapters of Genesis, Lord willing. Chapter 44. Then Joseph commanded the steward of his house, fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry. Put each man's money in the mouth of his sack. Here's where the silver cup comes in. Put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest with his money for the grain. He did as Joseph told him. As soon as the morning was light, the men were sent away with their donkeys. They had gone only a short distance from the city. Now Joseph said to his steward, "Get up, follow after the men. And when you overtake them, say to them, why have you repaid evil for good? Is it not from this that my Lord drinks, and by this that he practices divination? You have done evil in doing this." Well, Joseph gives them the sternest test of all, making it look like not only did they steal the money they should have left in Egypt, but they took his precious silver cup by which he practiced divination. Define divination for us, Becky.
Well, if you divine something, you figure it out from whatever evidence you've got, and sometimes they use very silly things to try to figure it out, like innards of goats and bones and what all.
Right, this was a very advanced practice, not only in Egypt, but in Mesopotamia, and people underwent training usually priests of a certain god,
like reading tea leaves.
like reading tea leaves or ripples in water,
Palm reading.
palm reading, and as Becky mentioned, cutting open an animal and studying its entrails, looking for unusual formations.
What they ate yesterday.
No, not quite, but not a bad analogy. Why is it called divination?
The word divine comes to mind, but
Man,
that is a verb. It just means that you figure something out.
well, go back to the basic meaning of divine. You figure it out by contacting spirits or gods, goddesses.
Divinities.
Yes,
Okay.
this came from the other world. Interesting here to see Joseph practicing this. Apparently, he has adopted some of the practices of the Egyptians. Whether he thought it was the God of his fathers who was giving this information, we don't know. But much later than this, in the time of Moses and the law, this kind of practice was forbidden to the Israelites, but apparently not at this point. So, a man like Joseph is able to find out what's going on. That might explain some of his knowledge of these brothers, at least in their thinking. We know that it came from being in the same family. And notice the steward says, "You men have exchanged evil for good." And at the very end of this book, Joseph will state the opposite. "You brothers meant evil for me, but God turned it into good," which is really the theme of the Joseph story. Okay, anything else you want to bring up, Becky? Speculate a little. Why did Joseph want the cup put in Benjamin's sack?
Well, it certainly gave him leverage over the brothers because they weren't about to leave Benjamin there. Weren't going to go back to their father and say Benjamin isn't with us.
Once again, the theme of family favoritism comes up, always causing problems in Jacob's family. But Benjamin is his pet now that Joseph is gone, and the brothers know they can't go back and say Benjamin's a problem. At least that's their feeling, and so things have gotten worser and worser, as well as curiouser and curiouser. Wouldn't you say? I knew you would.
Joseph wants to see his father. I'm thinking maybe this is something he can use to get his father to come, maybe.
Good point. And to wrap up our passage for today, Becky, please read chapter 44, verse 6 through 13.
When he caught up with them, he repeated these words to them. But they said to him, "Why does my Lord say such things? Far be it from your servants to do anything like that. We even brought back to you from the land of Canaan the silver we found inside the mouths of our sacks. So why would we steal silver or gold from your master's house? If any of your servants is found to have it, he will die, and the rest of us will become my Lord's slaves." "Very well, then," he said, "let it be as you say. Whoever is found to have it will become my slave. The rest of you will be free from blame." Each of them quickly lowered his sack to the ground and opened it. Then the steward proceeded to search, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack.
Pum pum.
At this they tore their clothes. Then they all loaded their donkeys and returned to the city. Joseph was still
Oh,
in the...
no, that's it.
Okay.
Well, they're in a heap of trouble now. They speak rashly, knowing that they are in the right, or from their viewpoint. So we're so sure of this that whichever one of us has the cup, you can put to death, and the rest of us will be slaves. If you notice, the steward is more merciful in his counter proposal.
Yeah.
He says the one who's found with the cup will be a slave, and the rest of you can go free. And sure enough, it's found in poor Benjamin's sack. Why do they tear their clothes?
The sign of mourning,
It was a
grief.
sign of grief, woe, mourning. They would often tear their clothes. If they had lost a loved one, they might sit in an ash heap and throw the ashes on their head, as Job does in the book of Job. And that could be quite an expensive thing. If you had more than one change of clothing in that culture, you were pretty well off. So they do something costly in order to show their grief. They are in despair at this point. And we're going to leave us hanging over that cliff. Until next time, whatever you do, dear listeners, don't read ahead. Oh, you can go ahead and read ahead. You may know the story already. Ultimately, I'll spoiler alert. Ultimately, the story has a happy ending. So you can let go of your grip on the cliff after you get back on top. Well, anything else to add before we bid everybody adieu?
Nope.
Well, just remember, as always,
Don't
don't
send
send
money.
money. May God bless and keep you.